Can you hear me okay? Okay, there we go. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Ann Arbor Area Transportation Authority Board of Directors meeting. It is Thursday, March 21st, and we do have a quorum. We're going to go ahead and get started. The first thing on our agenda is to approve the agenda. Do I have any takers on making a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved, Rich.
That would be Rich, seconded by Susan. All in favor, say aye, raise your hands. Very good. That was unanimously passed. I appreciate that. Next on the agenda is public comment. If you are using the computer, please raise your raise hand icon. If you're calling in on the phone, please hit *9 and you will be told when you are available. We also have someone in the gallery. So if our people online would be patient and we'll, this gentleman, would you like to speak?
Yes. I've been a bus rider for 7 years since I moved back here.
If you would be kind enough to step to the podium and state your name.
Okay.
Thank you.
It's Leon Linderman, and I've been a bus rider for 7 years since I moved back to Ann Arbor. So mostly I've enjoyed it, but there have been problems, and I noticed that I'm not alone in having those problems. They're common for elderly people and disabled people. And that is, bus drivers tend to pull away from the stop too quickly in the process of the passenger being seated. There's 4 areas of vulnerability when they've shown their card, their green card, or they've paid their fare and they're walking to the seat. That's the first one. The second one is when they're turning around. The third one is when they're in the process of sitting down. And the fourth one is when they've sat down, but they haven't planted themselves. They haven't settled in their seat. So they usually sit down on the front of the seat. And then the next step is to sit back in the chair. All 4 of those are vulnerable areas. And what bus drivers fail to realize is that there are 4. And so most of the incidents, I think, occur after the person arrives at the seat and has turned around. Although I've seen incidents earlier. Now, admittedly, this used to be a bigger problem for me. And I've kind of taken it under my responsibility to stop it. One of the ways I use is to ask the bus driver to wait till I'm seated. But even then, they don't realize that after you're seated, you still have to sit back in your seat. And if the bus driver pulls away, even if they're going very slowly and pulling away, the mass of the bus will enact quite a force. And for someone who's already vulnerable, and many elderly people are, that can be very disruptive and hurtful. It can cause injury. It can exacerbate an old existing injury. So I've spoken to 2 people who have some sort of leadership responsibility in the Ann Arbor Transportation Authority over the years and complained, and it's continued. The problem has continued. Now, recently, I've been removing my card, my green card, instead of showing it within the wallet. There's a place where cards can be, there's a feature in all wallets where you can insert a card and it can be seen through the transparent material that covers it, if you know what I mean. But still, drivers have had problems with visualizing that, with perceiving the card. So I take it out of my wallet now, and they seem to be taking to that. And so there's almost like a change of attitude. But when you look at the level of risk where pulling away too early subjects the passenger to, no one should have to take those sorts of steps. And why don't the bus drivers speak up too and say, I'd appreciate it if you showed me, or took your card out of your wallet and you showed it to me. And then also, why does it trigger all this enough hostility or anger on the part of the bus driver to drive the amount of whatever it is, aggression, it causes them to pull away when the passenger is still in jeopardy? Now, maybe if the bus drivers knew about the fact that all four areas, all four times after the passenger has boarded the bus and has gone to their seat, leave the passenger vulnerable to injury if the bus driver pulls away too soon. And that also, no matter how slowly they pull away, the mere fact that the bus is so heavy creates the force. What is it, mass times acceleration equals force? I think it is. So you don't need a lot of acceleration. I think that all bus drivers ought to be trained in this way, and they ought to be supervised, consistently reminded of the fact that they can't do that to people. And I've noticed the lessening of elderly people that are using the bus. If I'm not mistaken, there's very few elderly people who use the bus. Mainly it's younger people. The second thing is that just as I felt like I've had some leverage and I was changing how bus drivers react to me, I haven't had many hurtful incidents lately. They show more consideration. I'm not sure exactly why. Maybe it is the fact that I'm taking the card out of the wallet, and I'm also showing more consideration for the bus driver. And they have a heck of a hard job. I try to let them know that I appreciate them. I do, especially those who are professional and do the job well. I have tremendous admiration for that. The irony is that I was one of the first people hired as a driver for the Ann Arbor Transportation Company back in 1964. I was a student at U of M, and I took a bus out, and in those days, they all had none of them had the automatic shift. I didn't know how to drive with a clutch. So I was hired anyways. And I went and got a car to practice on. But by the time I learned how to do it, I'd gotten so, if I remember correctly, I'd gotten so absorbed in my studies again. The new term began and so forth. Anyways, it's left me with an appreciation for drivers. And, but getting back to this concern about injuries, I was picked up at Washtenaw and Platte Road.
You have 1 minute remaining for
I
public
was
comment.
picked up at Washtenaw and Platte Road, I think it was last Saturday night at 6:25. So the 24 bus stopped to pick me up. I had a cart full of groceries. The driver saw that. She let down the what do you call it?
The ramp? The ramp?
The ramp, yes, thank you. And I pushed my cart up the ramp. As I was showing her my card, she accidentally, I think accidentally, started retracting the ramp, and it actually hit me in the hip on the way down. So I told her, if it's more than a scrape, I'm going to have to call it in. I'm doing that tonight. Again, I don't think she did this intentionally. It's just a lapse. and, or she may have not been trained sufficiently. So again, you've got to emphasize training here. You know, especially for older people like myself, and I can appreciate how vulnerable the aging process leaves you. I'm a lifelong athlete, and I was on the track and field team here. So I'm blessed with longevity and good health mostly. But even I am vulnerable. Arthritis sets in. I can't emphasize training and harping on these, having consideration and courtesy enough. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your time. Deb, is there anyone online or on the phone?
We do. Jim Mogensen, and you are unmuted.
Yes, Jim Mogensen. So the first thing I wanted to say is I wanted to thank you for having the meeting over in Ypsilanti last month. The OWL system worked. I was pleased to see that. I know it can be discouraging. It's hard, can be difficult to get folks to come to these formal public meetings, but I think it's important to make it easier to do that, and will be good outreach to the community to do that again as soon as you can. Particularly since at Riverside you could take the bus riders could get there. Some of the other potential places are harder to get by bus. The second thing is I wanted to say that in this afternoon I went to the Donga Bay Operations Center, and there's a person being trained and a trainer, and I had a whole lot of bus tokens that I needed to get, and they did a great job. So I'd really appreciate it if senior staff would just let them know that it was noticed, appreciated, and higher level staff were given that heads up. Now you're going to talk about innovation, and one of the challenges I think with innovation, we're all like lots of us are in favor of innovation, and as someone who's come around again, a lot of times it was like, boy, if only we had innovation, everything would be different. As if people hadn't thought about different innovations before. And the reality is that's not entirely true. And just keep that in mind. For example, if you had people going TheRide to get onto, if you started moving things more to the line routes and used TheRide to get there, that's how AATA started, by having Dial-A-Ride going to those routes. And the challenge is you have to make connections, and it's a really it's not great for the riders. And so they've moved away from doing that, and that's where they ended up going to the coverage mode. The final thing I'd like to say is I've brought to Mr. Carpenter's attention about the central student government and Airbus. This is a new thing that they're doing. It's pretty robust. They had at the December Regents meeting, they talked about having 800 people do it last Thanksgiving, and they were really increasing it. And if you look at their website, it's robust. And the concern I had was if all the students start taking Airbus, their program, instead of taking Michigan Flyer, that could be a problem for the community at large. If Michigan Flyer can't maintain the amount. Now, as I am one of those folks who knows more than there is to know about, like some of the federal funding, and what I would like to say is that it doesn't matter that it's not AATA's fault. Most people in the community, if Michigan Flyer had to change its service, would still tie the AATA to that service as Air Ride. Even if the advertising isn't there anymore or any of those other things. So I just wanted to give you that heads up and say, I know it's not fair, but it's kind of the reality. And just to keep track of that, and particularly reach out and find out how it's being funded. And so we can be better in that partnership with the university. As always, thank you very much for your time and attention.
Thank you for your comments. Deb, is there anyone else?
We have no more for public comment.
All right, thank you, everyone. That will close our public comment, agenda item 1.2, and we will go on to general announcements. Are there any general announcements? I do have one. The Governance Committee and I were speaking this week with regards to it being Transit Worker Appreciation Week. And so we have developed a proclamation that I believe all board members would want to get behind. And it reads the following: Transit Worker Appreciation Week Proclamation. Whereas National Transit Employee Appreciation Day was established to recognize the efforts of transit workers across the United States, and whereas the Ann Arbor Transportation Authority Board of Directors recognizes the important role that all transit workers play in providing exceptional services to our communities, and whereas transit employees work hard and are dedicated to provide essential services each day to help transit users access jobs, healthcare, school, community services, and many other personal, social, and civic opportunities. It is proclaimed this day that the AAATA Board of Directors recognizes March 18th to the 22nd as Transit Worker Appreciation Week and encourages the community to join us in thanking our transit employees. So I don't know that we have to have a vote on that, but I would like a round of applause because for our workers. Thank you, everyone, for your hard work. That includes everyone, including the executive team and our CEO. All right, we will then move on to our consent agenda. Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented tonight in our packet? Motion by Mike Alamang, seconded by Jesse Miller. All those in favor, raise your hands. Thank you very much. That passed unanimously. I appreciate you giving me the time to look around the room and count hands. It's a weird position right here. The next on our agenda is our ownership linkage, which is Mr. Rich Chang with the Open Dialogue Task Force update.
Thank you. I don't know why I didn't notice this before, but I do appreciate the Canadian version of dialogue that is in here. Want to give a couple updates around this. So the ODTF, we actually met a couple days ago, and it was really originally to really talk around initiatives of moral ownership linkage. But the wise folks on the team, we actually ended up taking a little bit step back and said, okay, before we even start tackling that, maybe there's some homework we probably need to do initially. And it came down to 3 challenges that we're trying to figure out. One is, do we have a firm understanding of the priorities, values, and needs of our ownership? 2 is, do we have ends and policies that need to be created or need to be modified to cover those priorities and values? And the 3rd is, we want to know why those who do not use the service do not use it. So we had some really good dialogue, especially tying in the phone survey that Hugh has done for us. And so if you all remember, like Hugh did this phone survey for us in 2021, primarily around the millage, just so we knew that what's the millage and what the long-range plan, everything we're going to cover in that was actually meeting what the community was asking for. We then want to say, okay, if we had this particular phone survey, does that apply to some of the challenges or the values or goals that we have today? And what we basically decided is that, one, yes, we want to have Hugh come in, which we all talked about at the last board meeting. So he's actually going to be here for our April meeting. But then we also said, okay, well, let's make sure that we are utilizing his knowledge to the maximum of his abilities and the time that we have with him. So we went over some different data points, and basically what he did is we came up with some challenges to overcome, questions for the board, and then questions for Hugh. And rather than go through the entire document, the ODTF, we actually went through that document this week. I'm going to send a link out to the rest of the board that I would love to get your input. It's not required, but any input would be helpful. There is a tight deadline, though, if I can get that feedback in by next Friday, because we want to get these questions off to Hugh in case there's some that he has to do a little research on his end. So when he shows up in April, he's ready to go and hit the ground running from that. So that's all I have for there.
Thank you, Rich. Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Chang? Seeing none, we'll close that and open up to our policy monitoring. We're going to talk about financial conditions 2.5, and that is Ms. Dina Reed.
Hello. Okay, good. Thank you. So monitoring 2.5 financial conditions is in your packet. The report was initially presented by staff to the board as fully compliant on all policies and sub-policies. The report was reviewed by 6 board members, and the performance on interpretations and evidence were indicated to be reasonable and compliant based on the voting in there. There were also a couple of comments I just wanted to note under section 2.5.4.1 that were discussed in detail with the Finance Committee when the Finance Committee reviewed the report. To summarize, the comments in the discussion were related to the reasonableness of the dollar threshold of $250,000 as a level of significance of financial harm regarding when the board would be indicated or would be notified for a significant incident of fraud. The board may wish to discuss this further, but after further discussion by the Finance Committee, they just moved on from that. There was another comment that I wanted to mention about the CEO comments on page 51 of your packet. One in committee, a question was raised about the second note. So there were 3 notes under the CEO comments, and the second one, there was just a question about whether that was still valid. Staff reviewed that, and what we identified was that those comments were a carryover from the prior monitoring report. 2 of the 3, the first and the third, we feel are still applicable, but the second one really should be disregarded. So staff requests that you disregard the second comment under the CEO comments. In closing, the Finance Committee recommended that the board approve the monitoring report 2.5 as fully compliant. And that ends my report. I'm happy to answer questions or turn it back over to you for discussion.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions or comments for Ms. Reed? Mike?
Yes, Dina mentioned that we had at the Finance Committee a brief discussion about the fraud report, and specifically that it indicated that the staff did not have to notify the board of any fraud that occurred that was less than $250,000. And Matt certainly replied to that in that he and Dina brought to us over the past few years several items that were less than that he thought that was important for the board to know about. But as Dina said, 2 out of the 6 board members that filled out the survey mentioned that. One of those 2 thought that the interpretation was not adequate. And I just thought because 2 of the 6 brought it up in the survey, I just would like to hear if there are any other board members or even the board members who made those comments want to provide a little bit of what their thoughts are on whether maybe we should consider lowering that threshold.
Thank you, Mike. Does anyone have any comments on what Mike just said or have any additional thoughts? Yes, Rich.
I mean, does the dollar amount really matter though, right? Because
Yeah.
there's policy that says if something happens, the CEO is supposed to tell us. So I don't know if.
Yeah, it was the dollar amount that was the threshold of $250,000 for notifying us about fraud.
Right, but I'm just saying, like, does the dollar amount in the end really matter to us? I mean, if it's like $10, $20, I don't think it's reasonable for us to expect the CEO, but I think anything that's large within the preview of the CEO is going to tell us if he thinks something that's important. So that's what I'm saying. Like, I don't know if even setting it even a lower amount in the end is going to, because I don't know what amount to set it to, right? Is it
Well,
10,000?
it was suggested in the meeting that perhaps 100,000. Still significant.
Yeah, it's
Still,
like, that's still a significant
it's not petty
amount.
cash.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know that one of our policies does state that the CEO cannot make any expenditures over $250,000, and he has to come to the board, and I think that was part of the conclusion and part of the rationale for it. I'm comfortable with that. However, this is a board decision. If there are any other concerns, I'd like to have that dialogue now or say that we will move on. Yes, Chris?
I wasn't one of the two, but I just think it's important to make note. I was a former CPA and auditor, and this threshold represents less than 0.5% of our annual operating budget. I think it's 0.45%. So just from an overall materiality kind of threshold.
Mhm. That's a good point. Thank you. Julie?
And I seem to recall at the committee level that our conversation echoed Rich's point pretty much precisely, that we do have another policy that if something is awry, that the CEO will let us know. So I think that kind of swayed me in thinking that it's fine just where it is.
Yes, Simi, Mr. Barr.
Yeah, thanks. I was one of the commenters on this, and I know it also referenced the number of instances of fraud, and though they may be well under the threshold, there was the concern that if there are really a lot of these happening, they can add up to this value we deem significant. But if the finance committee's comfortable with what they heard, I have trust in them. So, but wanted to put that on the record.
I suppose Mr. Barber raises an interesting conundrum here in that when we say $250,000, is that a one-time incident? Or are we looking at, let's say you have, I'm not saying this is going to happen, and I trust our employees, but let's say you have multiple issues happen that reach $250,000. So maybe that part of the interpretation is something that we're talking about here. Is that part of what you're saying, Simi? Oh, okay. Jesse?
I think it's important that this policy is under it's particularly a financial policy about the financial strength of the organization. So I think that the point about it being, less than 0.5% is, a reasonable threshold, since this policy is really just dealing with making sure that that the CEO maintains a strong financial position. There's also the other impacts that the CEO lists, including someone in a position of authority that embezzles for personal reasons, or anything that could harm public credibility for the organization. And so I think that, if that's the definition the CEO is using, I trust that, if there were such a crime to be happening that was under that threshold, the other reasons listed would be covered, and the CEO would, under his own definition, let us know, even if it weren't approaching that dollar amount.
Thank you for that point of view. Is there any other? Yes, Mike.
Yeah, well, let me just follow up on what Simi said. Yeah, the finance committee did recommend approval as it was, but with really the add-on that we thought it was important to discuss it at the whole board, and that's certainly happened.
If the board has exhausted its conversation on this, it sounds like we're moving towards a motion to accept the report. Is there anyone who would like to make a motion? Julie? Oh, yes. Can you state what the motion is, please? Because there are several options and we need to know which motion you're putting forth.
I think exactly what you said, to move, what are we moving? All of the report.
To accept the report as a
Yes.
reasonable interpretation for all policy items and that the evidence demonstrates compliance with interpretations.
Thank you. Spring break is in like a day, right?
No worries.
Yeah.
Do I have a second? I'll take Jesse Miller. All those in favor, please raise your hands. And that passed unanimously. Thank you, everyone. We will now move on to cash and investments 2.6, and that is again Ms. Dina Reed.
Thank you. Monitoring report 2.6, cash and investments, is in your packet. The report was presented to the board as fully compliant on all policies and sub-policies. There are a couple items I'd just like to note that were also noted at the Finance Committee for the full board. I'd like to mention that this report does cover 9 months of fiscal year 2023 to align the report with the fiscal year. This last year, the board voted to make this report an annual report versus a semi-annual report. And so our thought was that if it was going to be annual, that it should align with the fiscal year. So again, this report aligns it for 9 months to get us to the end of fiscal year 23. And next year, when the report is monitored at this time, it will be for the full fiscal year of 2024. The other note I wanted to make is related to that. There is information in here as evidence, financial information that is presented to the board quarterly. So you just want to remind the board that the information in the report for this purpose is for monitoring and evidence support. But we also present this information 4 times a year in quarterly financial reports. So it's not that you won't get this information on a regular and timely basis regarding to financial reporting, because you will in our quarterly reports. And I've already reported, for instance, last month I reported the first quarter of 2024 already. So this is again just for the purpose of monitoring and evidence, and not necessarily the most current financial information available. Related to the monitoring report itself, five board members reviewed the report, and the performance on interpretation and evidence were indicated to be compliant, and there were no additional comments to consider. The Finance Committee reviewed the report and recommends that the board approve the report as fully compliant. That's the end of my report. Questions?
Thank you, Ms. Reed. We'll go ahead and open it up to the board for questions. Do we have any comments or questions? Mike?
Yeah, I have a couple of comments. First of all, I hope people noticed in the report all the green, the history of green. This is one thing that the finance department has done a terrific job on over a number of years. Another thing is, it is probably easier to have interpretations and certainly evidence on financial matters. And probably Matt appreciates that. It makes it easier because it's finance, it's numbers. And so there's a lot more clear evidence and it also easier to make interpretations of the policy on most of them. So that's good. That's not bad. It just means we won't have nearly as many conversations, particularly about the evidence and interpretations on these two as we would expect on others.
Thank you, Mike. Are there any comments or questions from the rest of the board? Seeing none, we'll close the comment section and we will go ahead and ask for a motion. I believe you said the Finance Committee wanted to accept it as A? Yes. All right, would someone like to make that motion to accept it as a reasonable interpretation for all policy items and the evidence demonstrates compliance with the interpretations?
This is Rich, so moved. That will go with A, reasonable interpretation for all policy items, and that the evidence demonstrates compliance with the interpretations.
Thank you, Mr. Chang. Do I have a second? That would be Mr. Allen. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Very good. That passed unanimously. Good work, board. Moving along, we're going, I'm sorry. Yes, Mr.
I'm
Chang?
sorry, I wanted to ask a question. With policy 2.5, is there a to-do that the Finance Committee or some committee is going to look at the number figure moving forward? Or are we good with that number?
The discussion of the board tonight was that there would be no more discussion. We closed that discussion and it seemed like everybody was satisfied with the rationale that was presented. However, if we want to backtrack and go back to that, but it...
No, I thought I heard that there was, but that's why I wanted to clarify.
Okay.
So, okay, that's good.
All right, thank you very much. Moving on, we're going to go to our innovation presentation by Mr. Carpenter.
Innovatively Sorry?
No catnaps for you.
Frozen. Okay, computer's frozen, so I will be innovatively interpretive dancing my PowerPoint, perhaps some shadow puppets.
Hello, sorry. Continue. Let me just see what's going on here.
Okay, perfect, thank you.
Okay, excellent, all right. Sometimes innovation needs a little kick to get it jump-started, so if we can, is it up on your monitors? No? Yeah, there we go, okay. Well, thank you, board members. You have a policy under communication and support to the board where you ask me to provide you sort of incidental information. It's a list of things you just sort of like to know. And among that list is a requirement to present you with a presentation once a year about relevant trends and applicable technologies and innovations trialed or introduced over the past year. So that's what I'm here to do tonight. I'm going to say, hopefully briefly, some presentations along the lines of what you've laid out in the policy. I'll cover trends and innovations, some technologies, and some other things that are, I think, change related, but not necessarily technological changes. There's no decision based on this. There's no action item, but I'm more than happy to have discussion or questions. We can take it wherever you would like. So in terms of trends, there's a lot that we keep an eye on. They're mostly focused on what could affect the demand of the service or our ability to supply the service financially or otherwise. This is a list of some of the biggest ones. I'm not going to go through them in detail. I'm going to focus on a couple of the, I think, most important ones. We talk about demographics. That's obviously one we keep an eye on. The demographics of our area are really modest growth. Ann Arbor, I think, is projected as the highest growth over the next few years. It's only at 3% between 2020 and 2030. These come from SEMCOG, the regional demographic agency. And there are some indications of, I'm going to say not stagnant necessarily, but, fairly slow growth. Washtenaw County actually looks like it lost maybe 900 people last year. So our area is not a high growth area. We're not one of those parts of the country, but we are sort of steady. The implication here is that for us growing our ridership, it talks about growing market share as opposed to just tapping into a growing population. There's going to be a little overlap tonight with things we discussed last month in Ypsilanti when I brought forward some ideas about ridership. I may bump into issues of supply and demand. My apologies if I use those terms. Land development, we're very much still a sprawl kind of world. There is way more infill and intensification of development, particularly in the city of Ann Arbor, than there has been in a very long time. But we still have things like Livingston County, Scioto Township, where a lot of the growth that is happening is going into shapes that are not entirely conducive to public transit. That's something we have to keep an eye on, although I think we're seeing green shoots of that shifting, which is really nice. Interestingly, along this, we also see some socio-political gentrification pressure. And this goes back to affordable housing, but also we represent multiple communities. When we look at several parts of Ann Arbor and Ypsilanti, we can see this pressure out there, and it may affect us in one way or another in the future. There are a number of things out there like labor shortages and housing affordability that were issues before the pandemic. They are still issues, if not greater issues than that. There's a host of things I call the pandemic hangover. Things like inflation, very much triggered by the pandemic, economic dislocation, we'll talk about some of those things, and then just sort of a lingering social fear that is sometimes there. And then politics. We exist in a very politically oriented environment. A lot of our money comes from senior government, state or federal, and their political priorities matter to us. They have a way of shaping our priorities. Of course, the biggest trend that we're all adjusting to is, I think it really affects the demand for transportation, is the work from home phenomena. Before the pandemic, telework was a small sliver of mode share, and it was growing very slowly. And then, in a couple of weeks, guess what? For anyone who can work at home, you have to. It has now become institutionalized. It's clearly here to stay. But no one really knows exactly how this is going to affect cities more broadly or public transportation. I've seen a lot of things in the popular press about trying to convert office towers into apartment towers. And you know what the biggest hangup there is? Plumbing. They don't have as many bathrooms, and that drives the cost. So those are the things we're discovering as we go through these things. Washington, D.C., the WMATA subway system, staring at a fiscal cliff, in part because their ridership is still very soft, because their fare revenue is not where it needs to be, because the federal government has not asked or ordered all of their staff to come back to work. DC was a very office-oriented 9-to-5 commuter culture-driven subway system because of all the office workers, and they have not been asked to come back yet or made to come back yet. And if you have a labor shortage, how do you force your employees to do something they're not comfortable with? You see the rock and a hard place moment there. Some transit systems have recovered their pre-pandemic ridership. Those are generally systems that had very few discretionary riders before. They were primarily serving a captive market who didn't have much of a choice. That's perhaps not surprising. They've come back faster. WMATA is a cautionary tale about what can happen when you lose a good chunk of this market. Now, we here are affected less, but we still certainly have more vacant storefronts in downtown Ann Arbor than I'd like to see. There's no question that this took a hit on us. I think we also have to consider how many university students are doing classes on Zoom. I don't know how frequently that's happening now. I assume there's some of it. This is definitely an effect. It's definitely here to stay. Slow growth will eventually, I believe, put those storefronts back in Ann Arbor, fill up all the apartment buildings, but it's going to take much longer than I know I had hoped for a quick rebound in that space. So cities are looking to adjust. Transit systems are looking to adjust. And the transit systems, what we see and hear from our peers is we have to keep serving the 9-to-5 commuter market. They didn't go away. They just kind of softened a little bit and shrunk. But we still need to serve them. But we need to branch out and do other markets as well. Other markets meaning traveling at different times, say later evening hours or earlier morning hours, or on the weekends or overnight. It just so happens we are going to be part of this experiment when all of those services, which were part of our millage, are going to kick up in August. A lot of those off what we had traditionally called off-peak or off of the commuter rush hour schedule, a lot of those services are going to happen here. So we are perhaps not intentionally leaning into that space, but we are going to follow some of our other peer agencies into experimenting growing markets in those off-peak areas. Technology, obviously a big part of this policy and a big part of what we look at. Kind of a mixed bag, a lot of ups and downs in this space. Before the pandemic, we saw just a huge burst of app-enabled, disruptive transportation sorts of opportunities out there coming from technology innovations. What we didn't always see as clearly was the venture capital backing a lot of those things. Since then, as interest rates have gone up, we've seen a lot of that sort of pull back. The tide has receded. So the pictures here you see, the blue van is Ford Chariot. That was their micro-mobility service they had. They shut that down in 2021, wrote off $65 million acquisition they had made a few years before. Ford can just do that. The bike is theirs too. Ford owned a bike share system for a little while. Bird, who is the company that keeps the e-scooters and e-bikes here in Ann Arbor, filed for bankruptcy in December. They're reorganizing, and I understand verbally they've tried to reassure Ann Arbor, no, you're a really good market, we want to stay here, we're not going anywhere. Nevertheless, the reality in this space is very much affected by the underlying finances and economics of this. A lot of the app-enabled disruption that occurred, it changed how we communicate, how we hail a vehicle perhaps, how we organize our trips, but it didn't change the fact that transportation of a person, moving them from A to B, involves a vehicle, involves a driver, there are expenses to that. The fundamental underlying economics of transportation did not change. It was just backstopped by all that venture capital. And as that stuff pulls back, a lot of these things are frankly failing. Other things are sort of technology adjacent. The bus manufacturer market in the US is really struggling. This is obviously a trend that matters to us. It's not a technology thing, it's more of an economic market thing. When I started in this industry, there were at least 10 bus manufacturers. There are now 2 in the United States. Nova pulled out. Eldorado announced they're stopping bus manufacturing. Over in Belgium, Van Hool, which doesn't sell in the US except a very little bit, they announced they're axing their transit bus market. So this is a cumulative effect of all of the pandemic hangover plus fear of the Chinese manufacturers. They can compete at scale and at price that a lot of Western companies can't. There's been a great deal of consolidation. As a result, a lot of our industry and a lot of the executives in DC are very, very concerned about the health of our 2 remaining major bus manufacturers. So a lot of things around technology and the money behind the technology. So let's move from trends to the idea of innovation. You wanted lists and examples. I'll get there in just a slide. What is innovation? It's change, it's new things. The best functional definition I've ever bumped into is innovation that works, or novelty that works, excuse me. I really like that. It's new, or at least new to you, new to me. It's an idea we haven't heard before or experienced. It doesn't have to be technology. It can be a process, a practice, a mindset. It could be any number of things. It's change, and it has to be effective. It has to work. It has to provide value. We're not talking about gimmicks. We're talking about things that can make a difference. So a couple of successes over the last few years. I won't read them all, but I'll point out just one that I think is really nice. The Detroit to Ann Arbor bus service. This is something that was started by us and the Regional Transit Authority, restarted in 2021. We had a lot of questions about it. A lot of people weren't sure. It's the first reintroduction of scheduled passenger transportation service, serious schedule, between Ann Arbor and Metro Detroit since 1983. I don't count Amtrak, they only got a couple of trips. This is way more robust. A lot of people were unsure. We'd never done it with buses before. I'm happy to say it's now routinely clocking in 6,000 to 7,000 trips a month, which is very good for something that's just about to do, I think, its 3rd birthday. So that's wonderful. A good success, a good partnership, a good example of some of the things we've done recently. Okay, a couple of things that are either have come out the pipe or are coming out the pipe really soon. I won't go through the list. I'll talk about 2 of them. Narcan, it's a drug. It is a drug you administer in an emergency to reverse an opioid overdose and save a life. I'm sure you've heard about these things. A year or more ago, I know Jesse came to us and said, could we do something along these lines, vending machines? About the same time we were approached by others who wanted to do this. We began looking into it. We spoke with our lawyer and discovered there's actually a bit of a loophole in state law. If we do it through a vending machine, we could be liable if it's misused by someone who's not trained. So we said, hey, let's train our terminal staff and they can administer it. They have it behind the counter. Both terminals have it. It's already been used several times. So not a technology. Well, it is a technology, right? It's a chemical, so I count that. Another one I want to point to is the Throne, the off-site staff restrooms. So the picture here that you see, the little shed, is actually a very sophisticated porta-john. It's a company called Throne. It is an access-controlled, totally portable restroom facility. It is intended for things like carnivals and big events and things like that. The city of Ann Arbor called us up about a year ago and said, hey, we want to trial these, but we need at least 10 of them to get the deal. Will you help out? And I said, sure, let's go in for this. Because we have, particularly for our staff, when they're in the field, the bus drivers don't always have an easy place to go. So we said, let's give it a shot. It's neat because unlike a regular porta-john, this whole thing it's just like a robot porta-john. It's kind of hard to describe. The door slides back and forth. It's access controlled. very electronic. You get in with your smartphone or a ID badge or a passcode. If you trash the place, they know who you are. They can lock you out. If you go in and it's all messy, you can dial it in, they'll come send somebody else to fix it. It's got no plumbing, it's entirely self-contained. Solar panels for electricity, cellular service, so it's all hooked to this thing is amazing. So we said we want to give it a shot, so that is going to get rolled out along with the city's broader trial later this year. So very interested in that one. Taking a bit of a step further back, things that are a bit further in the queue but coming. We spent a little time this last year talking about zero emissions buses. There was a few technology issues that we bumped into as we went along with that discussion, so I count that. The signal priority thing, grinding forward, a slog, but definitely continuing to move. The advocacy agenda, a good example of new to you, not uncommon in other organizations. I don't believe we've ever done it before. I look forward to bringing that work to you in June. A lot of these ideas were identified in the long-range plan. We sort of set them up, and now we're just executing and going down the list and getting it done. There are some things that we are keeping under observation. It's the second one I want to bring to your attention, non-emergency medical transportation. This is demand response scheduled, like taxi trips, to get people to their doctor's appointments. A lot of transit agencies do a lot of this work. It's paid for by Medicaid and the hospitals, usually no subsidy so much from the transit agency per se. I think Flint is our sister agency, a little bit smaller than us. I think they have 200 drivers doing this, which is more than, we don't have that many bus drivers, and they have that many people doing this in the Flint area. We have more hospitals here. I suspect we have more latent demand. We did discuss this with you as part of the long-range plan in 2022. It wasn't anyone's really big priority, so we've sort of set it to the side. I want to let you know there are now 2 grassroots groups in town actively pursuing this. We speak to them, help them understand the issue they're grappling with. They're now conducting their own feasibility needs study. I think it is very likely that before the end of this calendar year, we will be approached and asked if we would consider getting into this line of business. This is a big deal. It would be a whole new wing of operations, not something we do, obviously not something to take lightly, until I get a formal ask. Like, that's the starting pistol. Until then, it's just waiting and watching and seeing how it goes. Of course, not every idea pans out. We have to sort of ruthlessly look at the ideas that we get and see if they make sense. So there have been several technology ideas that, honestly, for a variety of reasons, didn't quite pan out. That's okay. Fail fast, as they say, move on to the next one. And there are some things that, I'll be honest, are not under consideration that you may bump into in the popular press. Autonomous buses, self-driving buses. I know our union has raised concerns about this. I suspect before I retire, I might see something. But I gotta tell you, this technology is so far from ready, I don't even think it's worth any energy considering. And facial recognition, I'm not gonna touch that with a 10-foot camel prod. It is so controversial, and the benefit to us, we just don't need it. We just don't have that kind of a security issue here. So there are certain things we hear about, we look at it, gee, that's neat, we're just not even interested. Most of what I just talked about was what you have delegated to staff, the means, the operational sorts of decisions. But I want to pat you guys on the back too, because you actually do quite a lot of innovation and have done over the last couple of years. There are policies that you've developed that were not part of the boilerplate Carver template. There are things that you're discussing right now, public safety, that I have never seen a policy like that in any of those Carver templates. So in your own way, you're cutting edge. You also are doing some good work on ownership linkage. Your orientations have changed quite a lot. Your monitoring reports and your process and approach to that continue to evolve. And you had a meeting in Ypsilanti. It's a small thing, but it was a you-driven thing. We did that because you told us to go find it. So I think we should take credit for even these small things. They all add up. Which brings me to another really important point. Innovation and change. Yes, there's a lot of top-down stuff going on, but I don't actually think that's where most of the action is at. Most of the action is bottom-up. It comes from staff every day looking at what they do and saying to themselves, I think I could do this a little bit better. I think I see an opportunity here. And if we create a safe culture where people can take small risks and try some things out and get a little strength and build up, I think that cumulative effect of hundreds of little improvements over the course of a year can equal one big improvement really fast. So we've worked very hard to build a culture internally that supports and encourages that. I'm not saying it's perfect or this is ever done. This is kind of a forever piece of work, but I think we have come a very long way. This also, something I didn't put in this presentation that I wanted to talk about, it's the concept of evolution and revolution. You sometimes hear about change in those two contexts. I don't see it as an either or, and I don't think the agency does either. It's much more of a both thing. It's very situational. It depends on the opportunity or the need that's in front of you. In my professional experience, you get a revolutionary opportunity maybe every 10 to 20 years, to be perfectly honest. This is a very static industry. Transportation is not a radically changing field. Our environment is not growing, gangbusters. It's steady growth, but it's slow. The benefit from lots of incremental evolutionary improvements within the organization, I think, adds a lot of value. At some point, it'll kind of plateau, and at that point, revolution, I think, becomes even more advantageous. We do have some bigger things coming down the pipe that I'll be able to talk to you about in the coming months that I'm very excited about, that will definitely be more in the moonshot category of work, but they're very, very preliminary at this point. I wouldn't want to talk too much about them because they're kind of embarrassingly big. But I just wanted to say this about the culture. Now, evaluating effectiveness. You delegate to me and my staff to use our professional judgment to vet new ideas on the means and the operational side of things. And we do that. We do that a little bit ruthlessly, I'm going to be honest with you. We're very cognizant. We have limited resources, limited time, energy, money. And we have a duty to help the folks that we serve in this community. And if we misfire, if we put money or time on the wrong thing, that means we didn't do something else that we could have. So we take the effectiveness, novelty that works, very seriously. It has to be towards our agreed upon goals, the ends that you give us, how they show up in things like the long range plan. These are not my goals. Like, we're not chasing. I had lunch with somebody this week who works in a private sector capacity, and he was kind of talking about his own CEO chasing squirrels. I'm like, what do you mean? Well, he just sort of goes after whatever the shiny object is that week. And I'm like, okay. That, it's innovative, but it's questionable as in terms of does it work? And it has to be more cost effective, I think. It has to be towards the goals we've all agreed on, aligned. It has to have a meaningful benefit, and it has to be, frankly, more cost effective than something else. How many of you have heard of a monorail? How many of you have seen the Simpsons episode? Yeah, okay. Do you know why monorails exist? Very quickly, they are a 19th century invention because trains, conventional trains, which were the hot button technology at that time, pretty expensive. Somebody said, they're expensive because they got 2 rails. What if I can make a train with only 1 rail? It'll be less expensive. Okay, kind of, sort of didn't work. Monorails have never really displaced conventional 2-track trains. They have a small niche, mostly a novelty sort of thing, but they have to be better than the alternative. Just having a neat idea. We see lots of things every year where someone's built a better mousetrap, but it costs 10 times more than a regular mousetrap. Okay, this isn't necessarily going to work. At your seat is a page out of the corporate business plan that gives you a list of some of the criteria we use when we're trying to vet and judge things. George and I were talking the other week about how do you know an idea is a good idea? And how do you know an idea is maybe not entirely ready? And there's this sort of, when you've been in the industry as long as we have, you kind of know it when you see it, and the ideas of your professional judgment, which is part of what you pay us for. But I try to identify and make implicit things a little more explicit with lists like this. here are some of the questions we like to ask ourselves about these ideas. Is it aligned? Are the benefits really that good? Is this a priority? Whose job is this really? What are the risks? There's a whole lot of questions that if you go down a list like that, you can make implicit things much more explicit and discover exciting ideas. Now, the Gartner hype cycle, something I introduced a couple of years ago. I'm not going to speak about it in detail here, except to say that it's a thought tool introduced in Silicon Valley for venture capitalists. They have to make quick judgments about new proposals and startups. Is it time to get in on this, or is it, is this idea going to work, or is this company worth investing in? And they came to the observation that there can be a lot of hype when some new idea is introduced. That hype doesn't always pan out. Sometimes it takes longer to get to the maturity of an idea. I like to think about this to remind myself of a couple of things when I'm looking at new ideas. We all have emotional reactions. We're just humans. We like new things. We get excited about them. We have to accept our emotional reactions and then sometimes be prepared to look past them to the cold, hard benefit. Is this going to work? What are the risks involved? How long is this going to take to pay off? And the Gartner hype cycle is a good reminder to me that we're not the only ones who see the need occasionally to think that way. So in closing, you've asked for a presentation on trends and innovation. We've presented it here this evening. There certainly are a lot of trends. Happy to chat about them. We have introduced, are introducing, and will continue to introduce a lot of new innovations and technology, processes, culture, mindset, anything we can in order to help advance your goals. So again, no decision or action is necessary this evening, but it's a great opportunity to just talk about how we grapple with new ideas. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. We're going to open it up to the board now for conversation. Susan?
Thank you for the presentation. It's a topic area of great interest to me. Just a few things and then a question. The trends that you noted, I think, are good, but I think there are also some to also note. There is a trend not only in our particular area, but in general across the country. We're aging, and one of our big population groups are people over 65. We heard from somebody earlier today. At the same time, the university has been growing its enrollment over the last 10 years. That's another user group that's growing. So when we look macro at the SEMCOG numbers, I think we're missing the micro details within it. I think it's also useful to talk about the technology changes happening that affect us. Things like going to one location and getting information about the various ways you can get someplace. When I ask for directions, up comes transit, and it lets me know which transit choices are available to me in addition to the driving, in addition to the biking. And I think we are the beneficiaries of those kind of technology changes that are happening around us, and increasingly we're using them without thinking about it because that information is available. I think that one of the innovations that staff at the transit agency did that I personally love, it's one of my favorite, is at the bus stop, the text. I can text and ask for the location of my bus. And I gotta say, that's one of the things that I use the most. I love it. It lets me know coming 7 minutes is a bus, or I just missed it, it's gonna be another 20, but either way, it gives me the information I need. And it makes me feel much more readily able to use a bus when I'm not scheduled. So again, these technologies are happening amidst us. Another big one that I think for me this year was the year of the Taylor Swift concerts. Everywhere she went, transit use was through the roof. And we're seeing it on the D2A2 runs because they're promoting the Tiger Games. They're promoting the concerts. And those special event users who don't want to deal with parking, who don't want to deal with driving, I think are part of our future. When you've heard me talk before about these football shuttles, it seems like a latent opportunity. We're not really taking advantage of the special event transit opportunities. So there are opportunities beyond just the trends that you noted.
Oh, yeah.
And it leads to a question that I had, which was, we're not the only agency exploring what these innovations are. And what I would welcome is to become better informed, and I don't know how to do this as a board member. I don't know if we bring it to the board table or you give us access to APTA literature. But agencies, you mentioned Flint and their use of medical, there's so many things happening post-COVID where transit agencies are redefining themselves. I'd love to know what experiments they're taking on and what successes they're finding in growing their ridership or finding new support for individuals who have particular needs in their community, underserved communities, disabled communities. What are the experiments that they've taken on? And you heard me mention this a year or so ago about free fare. I'm less interested in taking away our revenues than interested to explore what are they doing to grow their ridership. Is it being successful? If so, how successful? And is it warranting the use of resources? So we don't have to be the knowledge source, but there are a lot of mid-sized agencies and smaller agencies around the country who are likewise being challenged to think different. And I'd love to know the results of their pilot projects. And again, it could be a simple APTA membership. I'd like to know and read some of the literature, what are some of the agencies reporting. We're lucky enough to be going to DC in a few weeks, and I'm very interested to sit in on some of those sessions just to hear what experiments are happening, pilots, whatever the correct word is, to grow ridership, to serve their communities better, and to target particular audiences within their community that have needed better service, and now we're going to get it. So I'm interested in those pilot projects, again, around the country, and wondered if there's a way you feel we could become better informed on those pilot projects. The good, the bad, the failures, the successes.
Excellent points. First of all, I want to confirm that you can see ridership bumps on D2, A2 for both Taylor Swift and Beyonce concerts over the last year. They were big enough that you saw it. So that gives you an idea of the magnitude of those superstars. Absolutely, I think there's lots of ways that we can help you guys develop your own, I want to say, independent access to the transit industry milieu. It is a big industry. There's at any given moment, hundreds, if not thousands, of different things going on. Kind of like drinking from a fire hose. A couple of things come to mind, and I'm going to ask, Deb and maybe Jeff to help me next week. We can send an email off to some of these things. But some things I've suggested, I would bring your attention back to. You guys are welcome to go to conferences as board members. And I think I sent you guys an email a little while back. APTA has some great conferences around the country. I think a couple of us are going to DC. You'll hear a bit there. That's going to be really money and politics focused. But I think they have a general meeting in October. I think it's out west. I can't remember, Anaheim maybe. They do technology and operational sorts of things. We do carry a budget. I know governance committee, we've talked about this. We can resend that email to you. We can send you information on how to sign up for the numerous newsletters you can get from APTA. They send out sort of weekly or monthly news blasts with just sort of news clips from things going on in the industry. There is a private website, transittalent.com. It's a job posting website, Transit Talent. A lot of job postings in there, but it's also like a newswire service where they pull together a lot of just news articles, how things are going and various things from the newspapers around the country, and post them on there. And it's actually become, I would say, the dominant way, like newswire service. APTA is good, but it's late. It's like weekly or monthly. Transit Talent is every 24 hours. They're updating with the latest stuff. And you can watch kind of in real time these things sort of develop and grow and evaluate, and which ones are successful and which ones fail. There are also lots of government-funded research bodies, think tanks. There's all sorts of things out there. I'd be more than happy to pull together sort of an email for you guys to consider. Some of it you'll have to sign yourself up for. You can pick and choose which ones you want to do. But no, very great idea. Happy to do that.
Thank you, Susan. Jen? Julie?
Thanks for the presentation. I strongly suspect that another horizon issue is going to be that public schools cutting transportation services. So I'm hopeful that we'll be able to have those conversations. I know we've talked about some potential innovations with school age kids in our community. And it may rise a little faster than maybe we thought.
Yeah. Thanks for raising that. If you're not aware, Ann Arbor Public Schools has encountered a bit of a budget challenge, I think just in the last 10 days, but it seems to be moving very fast. I have been thinking about reaching out to our contact there, Liz Margolis, to see, can we help? Is there something we can do? If to forestall any bad things from happening, but also maybe to give them an assist. I don't know, but I think it's worth the conversation. Sometimes, I think it was Churchill said, don't waste a good crisis. Sometimes the best innovations happen in a little bit of a pressure.
Yeah, and I know I've heard from at least one local elected official that they're getting requests for, say, like the city to bail the schools out, which I don't think is going to happen.
Yeah.
So I think it might be helpful for us to perhaps have at the ready just some just some talking points about how we do collaborate
Not a
with the
bad
schools
idea.
currently, because I think it could just be helpful to talk about that relationship and the mutual benefits that exist.
Yeah, that's a great idea, and I think, Jeff, if you can, I think we should sort of pull together some FAQs. We haven't been contacted yet on that point, but you're right, we could be. And it does raise sort of a convoluted point about roles. And to the extent we can, and that we're legally able to, we can help other institutions from time to time. We also have to sort of be careful about precedents and getting sucked into things. Several years ago, a local elected official here and I were talking about a bus shelter they wanted, and there's a concrete pad that has to be poured, and we generally pay for that. But she was also quite adamant that I needed to do all the curb and gutter work along the street there as well. And I'm pretty sure that's your job. You're the municipal government. I don't believe I'm legally authorized to do it. I think the restrictions on our funding would prevent me from paying from that, frankly. A little bit back and forth until they finally stopped asking me that, but it took a while. So roles are one of those things that do matter. But I think you're absolutely right about this particular moment, and I think AAPS has been a great partner. I think I will reach out to them and just sort of check.
Thank you. Rich?
Yeah, I just had two questions. First one, I may have missed it, but it was under consideration observation slide. I wasn't sure what CAVNU was. And then the second was that I was excited to see free fares under here, but I wasn't sure if that's like under the consideration or observation bucket.
Yes. Okay, let me backtrack here. This one? With my backpacker? Okay. So free fares, I mentioned transittalent.com. There's an article on there right now about Raleigh, North Carolina, and their experiment with free fares. I encourage you to go have a look at it. CAVNU it's a lot of things. I was kind of hoping no one would ask me about this.
Is it an acronym?
It is no, it's just a strange made up word. What it is, and you may or may not recall this, just before the pandemic, the governor made an announcement that there was going to be a autonomous car testing highway between Detroit, the Ford Motor Campus at Corktown, up Michigan Avenue to the American Center for Mobility at Willow Run, and then up to the north side of Ann Arbor where M-City is. Does anyone recall this? This evolved into the CAVNU project. CAVNU is, I think, the name of the project and the company. It is a private company behind it. It's then the pandemic hit, a whole lot. It's kept on behind the scenes, evolving. If you've been on I-94 like between Rawsonville and Belleville, you may have seen some dedicated lanes with pylons in the highway. That's what Cavanagh is turning into. Originally, it was supposed to be Michigan Avenue, and it was a surface street. It was going to be a test track for autonomous vehicles. It's kind of changed alignment onto 94, and it's kind of merging into that. And it's interesting to watch the pieces of it sort of move around and come together, because on one hand, you know, the governor at one time thought very highly of it. And in a state with a historical affinity for auto jobs, this was very much targeted at sort of maintaining Michigan's crown for automobile manufacturing, and no, Silicon Valley is not going to take this from us. One might look at it as sort of a political move in that direction. Cavanagh used to be known as Smart Cities, which was spun off of Alphabet, which is Google. They're a private for-profit company. When you dig into the background in it, they are part of a movement attempting to monetize public infrastructure. The ultimate way that you make money off of a street is to turn it into a toll road. Their investors include the Ontario Teachers Pension Fund, which is actually a massive corporate investor. They need returns of about 8% a year. It's pretty high. Good luck if you can find that. The only way you can get that kind of stuff is if you're charging to use a street. So we continue to participate in the project. They are no longer, originally they were really looking at us to do something that was never entirely clear what. Now they've really moved it over to the highway. Our role is increasingly less important to them, I think, as their scope just kind of evolves and shifts. I still don't know what their ultimate game is, but they are a private sector for-profit company working in that space. I don't think you can make that kind of money as a test track for autonomous vehicles when every car manufacturer has their own test track. I really don't know how that's going to work. But so we keep our eye, we are invited into things like this that have political overtones, for-profit overtones, other things like that. And they all sort of collide together. They go into the hype cycle, frankly. And I think Cavanagh is somewhere near the bottom of the trough right now. There was a lot of excitement before the pandemic. It slid down the hill. It hasn't yet figured out, is it going to be abandoned, or is it going to move back up the curve of productivity, develop a clear scope, a clear cash flow, somehow become something with legs. So that's what Cavanagh is in a nutshell, Rich. You're sorry you asked.
I'm glad you asked, because that was my one question. Does anyone else have any questions or comment? Mike?
Yeah, thank you very much, Matt. This was very enlightening, and I think really good background for the board, going through the trends and then talking to a degree about innovations. But one thing I was hoping to see that wasn't here, and it's kind of along the lines similar to what Susan was saying. I was really hoping to see a fair amount of information about what other agencies are trying, what they've actually done, what their experience has been, plus and minus, what they're thinking about doing, not just along the lines of ridership, of course, but all kinds of other things that may be out there. Further, maybe some thoughts about what agencies and maybe academics think might be happening a little bit further out rather than just the next couple of years. It might be more, or it might be really less of kind of incremental changes. And really, and even what larger agencies that we couldn't possibly think about spending the money that others are, what kinds of things they're thinking of, because that might give us some ideas about how to do something that wouldn't be so expensive. I just hope maybe the next time you do this, and this was really good, that we can find out more about, and you can let us know more about, even more than just giving us access to different publications and things like that. I think that would be really valuable. At least that's the way I'm looking at it.
I can certainly try. I do want to bring up a couple of limitations, in part because I kind of try to empower staff and ask them to innovate. I actually don't keep a running list of all the new things happening in the organization. I don't keep tabs on it that closely. When this presentation is due, I kind of circulate around to management and I was like, what have you done new in the last year? They have specifically asked things we've trialed, that's the language of this policy. There are things, on some of these lists that are derived from things we've seen our peers do. TheRide is a good example of that, driver safety doors or things like that.
But of course, what I'm talking about is what their experience was, rather than just saying something.
Right. How many days you got to go over that? In all honesty, it's a big subject, and I'd need to sort of think about how to present, how much, frankly, work we're going to put into that kind of effort.
And I understand that, Matt, certainly.
Okay.
And I wouldn't expect a full across the country, here's what everybody, different agencies are doing, but maybe selectively picking some that sound interesting and just might be indicative of what.
Just sort of examples.
A sample of what might be going on out there.
Okay, we can, the next time we do that, I will certainly keep that in mind.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments? Seeing none, thank you, Matt, for your presentation.
Thank you.
We will move on to our operational updates. That leads us to the fiscal year 24 quarter one service report from Mr. Brooks.
Good evening, everyone. Going to review the FY24 Q1 service report for you. If you look in your packet on page 92, a lot of positive trends are occurring within our agency. Our boardings are up 8% year over year. With the uptick in the boarding, the cost of boarding has decreased by 3%. If you look at the bottom of page 92 on the right-hand side, we've had an increase of 473,000 boardings in 1 year. Turn to page 93. Our fixed route ridership is continuously trending upwards, another good sign for our organization. On page 94, you're looking at the paratransit page. Our on-time performance is very high at 98%. And also, our ridership is also trending in a very positive way, as you can see at the bottom of page 94. On page 95, took a little digging to understand why we had a little bit of a dip in 23 Q3 going into 23 Q4. After digging into that, working with Enterprise, who was the biggest manager of this program, we realized that the dip came from the UAW strike that happened in 2023, September and October. The strike started 9/15/23 and lasted approximately 6 weeks. If another very positive trend I know the board's very interested in on page 96, Our trip denials over the last 3 quarters have dropped by 50%. So we're really trending in a positive direction there also. If you look at page 97, we did have a little bit of a dip and a leveling off of the D2, A2 ridership. I don't really have an explanation for that at this time. Another thing I'm very happy to report on is our on-time performance has become very consistent. As you can see, going back to September of 23, we were approximately, our on-time performance was approximately 76%. Each subsequent quarter, we have made strides and improvement, and now we are maintaining, our norm has become above 80% on-time performance. If you look in the industry, you would see that that is a very good result that not many agencies are experiencing. So very happy to report that to you. Any questions?
Does the board have any questions for Mr. Brooks? Seeing none, thank you very much for your report.
Thank you.
That moves us back to Mr. Carpenter for the CEO report and our ZEB update.
Thank you. I'm going to say a few words about the report. Transition to ZEBs. I'm going to ask Jeff if he would mind giving an update on the, not an earmark, congressionally directed funding request that we recently submitted. And then I have an update on the state budget that I'd like to ask Dina to jump into. But first, I'd like to start with just a congratulations to staff, and thank you to Jesse. We had a very good meeting with Ypsilanti City Council the other night. Presentation by Gretchen Johnson and Forest's Planning Division about the YTC terminal project. Very well received. I think Jesse is correct that she got better reaction and engagement from council than I usually do, so I'm trying not to take that personally. But definitely, I think a positive start to our discussion with them. They do seem aware that land acquisition is going to be a factor coming down. And I just want to give a little space and ask Jesse if there's anything he'd like to mention about that meeting. He did the great introductions as well, and if there's any comment he wanted to make.
No, I would definitely want to echo your sentiments. Gretchen did a fantastic job presenting and answering council's questions. They were engaged. I think it'll probably take a while for this to really become real. This was a topic when I joined the board in 2018, and has been, just a perennial. And this was not the first time we've presented on the YTC, and so I think it'll be it might take a minute for the new reality of the situation to sink in. But I am looking forward to seeing that realization kind of spread throughout the community.
Thank you. There's a variety of other things in the CEO report, and I'll be happy to answer afterwards. A little bit about ZEBs. We are well on our way now on implementation in terms of grant submissions. That is the next big thing. We have, at this point, have had 3 irons in the fire already. One of them burned out. The other 2 are going very strong. We had been approached by the city of Detroit a while back about going in with them on a Department of Energy grant. They decided to scuttle their own proposal, so that kind of dissipated. But Dina is well on her way with her team, assembling our big grant. Our main thrust had always been the low-no emissions grant program to the Federal Transit Administration. It's due at the end of April. We expect, I believe, to have a transition plan to you that same month for your final approval. I think she's got it well in hand. Long list of tasks. A good team, including folks in DC helping us, nonprofits who specialize in this area. I'm sure we could speak more about that. So moving well on grant writing. It's coming together. We still have over a month, so I'm pretty happy about that. And Jeff did a lot of hurried work this last week on putting another eye in the fire. Do you want to say a few words about that, Jeff?
This is on? Perfect. Happy to announce that this week we submitted, successfully submitted a earmark request through Senator Peters' office. Our request ended up being $4.3 million to help fund the hydrogen fueling station at the at 2700. With that, currently working on letters of support to send into Senator Peters' office. We have received letters thus far from our own internal union, as well as the American Center for Mobility, which is at Willow Run, which will be home to the future hydrogen hub, and also currently working with State Representative Jason Morgan on getting a letter signed from our state delegation in Washtenaw County. So continuing to do that, but great work from my team, Dina's team, on getting that earmark request in. We did not have a ton of time, but put together a really nice document, so now we'll just wait and see what happens. We will be submitting another request for funding through Congresswoman Dingell's office, expected to still be aligned with the hydrogen aspect. She has not released her guidelines yet, so as soon as that becomes available, we will be putting that forward. As far as overall funding, we do have a better shot in getting a higher amount through Senator Peters' office, given the political makeup of the U.S. Senate compared to the U.S. House currently. So happy with how everything turned out.
Thank you, Jeff. So we're taking every swing, every at-bat we can to move this along. Part of our underlying theory is the low-no grant is great, 80 cents on the dollar. Earmarks are 100 cents on the dollar, so that's even better money. So we will take that. And we are going to continue to work on that, and we have all this stuff will be in. Several of us are going to DC. I think this is going to be one of our central talking points with our delegation up there. We don't expect to hear answers on any of these three things until much later in the summer. It could even be September, just given the way the federal budget is sort of stalling and moving forward. So that's the updates on ZEBS. And at this point, I'd like to ask Dina to give us a little update on some of the things that are moving forward with the state budget.
Thank you. Okay, so the first thing I want to mention is that this is something that happens typically throughout every fiscal year. We get an initial projection from MDOT, from the state, about how much we're going to get for LBO funding, which is our, it's the line in our budget that says state operating funds, and it usually runs about 30% of our budget, 29 to 30, it's ranged from 29 to 32% pretty typically over the last several years. It's been lowering slowly over the last couple of years, and most recently, it's been as low as 29%. In our projections for outer years that we presented in the budget, we put 30% because it's typically around 30. So just to let you know kind of where we're at. There have been, you know that costs have been rising consistently. We've been telling you and projecting that over time. This year, when all of the agencies submitted their budgets to the state, which were due at the end of January and February, basically all of the expenses for transit agency requests went up about 9% in operating expenses. Significant requirements needed across the state. That's causing a big strain on what our percentage will be. So if there's a pot of money, and if everybody needs more of that overall and the pot doesn't grow, our percentage gets lowered. So the other thing that's happening is that the first round of budgets going through right now at the state level is a 15% decrease in operating LBO appropriations for transit. So combining both of those things, MDOT unfortunately had to let us know that if those numbers hold, we could be seeing a decrease to 26% in our LBO funding as early as 2025. So not this fiscal year that we're in now. I don't want you to panic. We're not panicking. There are a couple things going on. As I said, every year they come out with an initial number. That number gets revised over because of funding availability. So everybody, lots of transit supporters in Lansing. Jeff's doing his job. You know, Matt's going to Lansing. There's a lot we're doing to advocate. MPTA, the Association of Michigan, is heavily lobbying, advocating for additional transit funding. and there's a lot of support behind it. We're hopeful that we will end up with more funding overall. As far as overall costs though, and what they're coming in, I don't know that those would necessarily be decreased. So the reality of the situation is we may be looking at a lesser percentage. We're hopeful that it will be more than 26%, but just to let you know, as we start our budget process this year, we will be, putting in projections that are lower than what we might have originally projected for 2025. The good news is, as I mentioned, I think I mentioned this during our quarterly report, we are seeing an upside in property tax revenues, which will continue through next year. The first year of our millage, our new millage, takes effect this year. So the good news is the upside that we're seeing will be magnified a little bit because our millage rates have gone up. So I don't think there's any reason to panic at this point. I just wanted you to be aware of what's happening, let you know we're watching it closely. We're connected with our partners in Lansing, advocating for more funding, watching all of our other revenues, and certainly taking, as we always do, as we go into budget season, taking a close look at expenses, advising people just to make sure that as you're putting your budget together, that like we always do, we're watching things closely and not to be overly aggressive in the budget process. But honestly, I really see no reason to get too concerned. I just want to make you all aware.
Thank you, Dina. So this sort of file this under the no surprises clause. It's obviously a state budget issue. It's nothing we have any control over. There is a full court press. When we met with Representative Morgan, he was well aware of this, and the Transit Caucus, which is up to 47 members in the state. I think it's just the House.
No, there's members of the Senate as well.
Okay. So and they've never had a transit caucus before in Lansing, so this is great. So they're very focused on this, they're very aware of this. I was on a call about it this morning, so everyone's pulling. I would characterize this, I think this yesterday to staff. Right now, this is a political problem, not a budget problem. And the governor's budget, this is just the first draft, it's got a few more steps to go. They're gonna go on spring break, I think, soon, and then really when they're back from that is when things will start to pick up speed. So there's time. All the political actors we would want involved in this discussion are involved. I've even heard some relatively, painless ways of plugging the hole already starting to get floated. So we don't want to. Right now it's a political problem. We'll let you know as it continues how it shapes up. My gut tells me there's a good chance it may simply evaporate in the next draft budget, but I can't promise that, right? So we'll wait and see, but we just want to make sure you were aware. It is getting a little bit of media attention, not very much, but it is possible you may hear about it somewhere else. We wanted to make sure you heard from us first. That really concludes the CEO report. One last thing, maybe just to say, at the very back on page 101, 100 pages, really do want to congratulate Mark Nanas, 40 years with the Transit Association or the Authority, and a great guy, and one of the few people who will just tell me I'm wrong straight to my face. You're not holding back at all, so I really appreciate that. So congratulations, Mark. And Madam Chair, if there are any questions, we're happy to answer.
And that brings it back to the board. Does anyone have any questions or comments for Matt? Go ahead.
Just one around the stopgap bus replacement. With the transfer of it from Nova Bus to Gillig, is there an increase or decrease in the per bus cost? I was just kind of curious. I know like Nova Bus was kind of considered like a more premium.
The per unit cost?
I guess, or I guess is the contract, did we see a decrease, or are they just honoring whatever price we agreed to?
Do you happen to know?
Yeah, sure. It is an increase. It's the inflationary factor of having to go with a different contract. Right now, we're piggybacking essentially off of another contract with Washington State, so that we have that stopgap in place. And they had agreed to inflationary increases for the whole contract, which we have to abide by if we're going to go with that contract. Even if we went out to get our own contract, we are confident we'd be seeing the same increases since we'd have no control really or nothing to cap that. So that's unfortunate, but that is, we do have enough funding in place to purchase the buses that we need.
One other follow-up then, are we losing any functionality or bells and whistles that Nova Bus was technologically going to give us? Or?
Yeah, I'll jump in, and George may know sort of the latest, because I think Troy is, I don't know if he's at the plant right now, but he's putting the last bits on, you know, what does it look like. There are differences between the Gilligs and the Novas. And you will see, if you just look at the two different buses that you might ride today, you can get a sense of it. There will be differences. Part of the reason we went to Nova was that it had nice things that were unique to Nova. Premium is a good way of describing it. The extra width of the front door aperture is a fundamental thing, because the axle is pushed back on the Nova about 1.5 feet. The Gillig doesn't do that. That's why the door is tighter on the front end. That's gone. The windows on the Nova in general are bigger. They have one in the back. Gillig just doesn't offer that. That's not a feature. So that's going to have to change. We are trying to keep as much, we're trying to update our Gillig spec, what we want in the bus, as much as possible to mimic what the Novas had. So the seats, the flooring, the way the handrails are organized. There's a lot of things that we can do that will be similar. It won't look like our older Gilligs, but yeah, there are going to be some differences. I myself am not clear about the USB charging ports. I think it's an option, but I don't know what the latest on that one is. George, is there anything you'd add?
Yeah, we're trying to keep the USB ports, but we want to make sure that they're not on the outside of the bus. In other words, we don't want it in a conduit showing. We want it like to look modern. We're speccing out the buses now with a lot of input from the operators, asking them what their desires are, what their preferences are. I think we've come to a really good understanding of what we can get on this specific bus. We're also trying to make it look very similar to both the Gillig and the Nova bus, as far as like putting a ferrule strip on the top of the roof so that we can keep the design of the swoosh, just to keep them so that our fleet looks very similar. So something we've been working on a lot over the last month.
Did you have all your questions answered? Okay, great. Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, that closes the portion of our CEO report and ZEB update, and we will move on to closing items, our action item recap with Mr. Carpenter and Deb Holt.
Thank you. I think on the ownership dialogue task force, Rich has requested some feedback or input. It's a Google Doc. Okay, so Rich is circulating a Google Doc. And I am going to think about how to incorporate some peer best practices in the next innovation proposal. I think that's all I have. Deb, was there anything else?
You had made a note that you were going to send out again the conference opportunities.
Right, yes, thank you.
And also look into maybe some links for the APTA sign-up newsletters. I believe everyone is registered through APTA. I've tried to add as we have new board members. If not, connect with me and I can get you information on how to check for changing your password or updating if you've forgotten that information.
Yes, the agency is a member, I should say, of APTA, and that entitles you to be members as well. So all of the access on the website, we can get you in there.
That was it.
Wonderful. That leads us on to topics for our next meeting, and I really appreciate that we're not just looking at next month, but we're taking a look and pitching out to the future. So for next month, we're looking at further ZEB updates, communication and support to the board, which is 2.9, environmental sustainability, that's going to be our first go around, 2.11. In April, we'll be looking at our telephone survey results and a transition plan. May, whistleblower procedure, not policy. And then June, we'll come back with the advocacy agenda presentation by Matt. To be noted, our next meeting is Thursday, April 18th, 2024, here at the Downtown Library. And that leads us back to 9.3, public comment. Deb, is there anyone online by any chance?
We don't have any for public comment.
Thank you. Then that closes public comment. We'll move on to adjournment. I'll entertain a motion. Nobody raise your hands at once. Simi. And seconded by Chris. And all in favor, raise your hands. Very good. That passed unanimously. Everybody have a wonderful night. Enjoy this early gift. It's only 8:15.